Good afternoon, everybody. Like we very kindly said, thank you so much for having us here and welcoming us into the space with you all, and getting to be a part of this, attend sessions earlier as well. Like I said, I'm Andrew Beman. I'm one of our faculty research and instruction librarians down at USF in Tampa. I work primarily with the social sciences,
and I'm Janet Schalk. I work at Pasco-Hernando State College at the Porter campus in Wesley Chapel. That's a little bit north of Tampa, also in Florida. So we're close by, but we're at different institutions. And my role is a general purpose librarian. So I get to do kind of a little bit of everything. I get to do instruction, cataloging, purchasing, help out the desk, troubleshoot textbooks, whatever we need.
And I also was fortunate to work at Pasco-Hernando State College before coming to USF for about 10 years as a library director before I came here. So fortunately, Janet and I had a chance to collaborate beforehand, which kind of brings us to really what our kind of theme for our conversation today is, and what Janet and I really look at for as practitioners going forward and as researchers is looking at the types of collaborations specifically for information literacy instruction that exists between librarians directly between institutions, between in our kind of case, community or state colleges and public universities. We have environments like this where we have third-party and professional development organizations where we have great conversations and collaborations. But as far as like instruction collaborations between institutions where we know students will transfer, looking at, do those relationships exist? Do those partnerships exist? What do those instruction collaborations look like that are there?
And so kind of maybe just some background to that research. I think it's helpful to kind of look at the environment for transfer students. I know transfer students have come up in the conversations earlier today, but just kind of looking at the numbers, and this fall, I think that out of 11.7 million undergrads in the country, about 13.2% would be considered transfers. So I should have got the number on that exactly, but a lot of transfer students out there. And many of you all work at community colleges or state colleges where folks are intending to transfer. And we also know that community college, and maybe it might be helpful to take a pause to say community college more broadly. I know there's many different terms for that throughout the country. Sometimes it's just college, sometimes they're state colleges like at our institutions, and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that further down the road. But generally, when we're talking about community colleges, we're talking about the two-year colleges. And we do know that enrollment is growing. There's been a lot of attention on this topic, especially in the last 10 to 15 years as the cost of higher education is skyrocketing. Folks really questioning like sometimes the value of the college degree when they have to spend so much money. Community colleges are well placed to address that need. We know the value of higher education, but community colleges are well placed to kind of bring that to folks in a much more accessible manner. But they've taken a big hit. Like many institutions, COVID was devastating for enrollment, and I think community colleges took the biggest hit for that. But they're generally recovering to different levels. I know here in Florida, our recovery's been, last year was rough, but it was getting better. This year was a little bit kind of getting a little bit more back to normal, not quite there yet. And I think the numbers kind of across the board demonstrate that. But we're seeing the largest increases in enrollment from historically disadvantaged communities, which is a good thing because, again, one of the missions of the two-year college is to make a college degree more accessible to more people, and eliminating that cost barrier, but also that location barrier too. And so this is it's kind of recognized as an important mission. It's implemented across a lot of states as a priority, especially I know the discussion about free community college is out there. A lot of the discussion about student loan forgiveness. So it's kind of been more important than ever. But there has been some downsides, of course. So one of the things that has been identified as far back as 1965, we kind of dug that out, but a lot of researchers have pointed to this phenomenon of transfer shock, which is sort of like this temporary dip in grade performance when a student transfers to another institution. And that's been kind of a persistent thing that's been repeated, kind of come up repeatedly in research really since then. But it's the transfer shock is stronger in some places than others. I think Florida does relatively well overall. But again, it's kind of been a persistent problem, and there's a lot of different initiatives about how to address this. And another thing, kind of again, when we're thinking of the promise of community college, being able to transfer from a community college to a university, about 80% of folks that enter community college do intend to transfer and get their bachelor's degree, but only a third of them actually end up making it through to completion, or only a third of them actually make it to the university, and then even only about 16% actually complete their bachelor's. So even though there's that great desire to use the community college as a place to start to get the four-year degree, relatively few people are actually making it through to that point. And so part of that skill gap, there's a lot of different skills gaps that have been identified as part of that transfer shock, but information literacy has been identified as part of that challenge. And so Andrew's going to talk a little bit about kind of how we can maybe address some of those issues.
One of the things that we were kind of thinking about, and Janet and I were talking about, was would it be possible to look and see what kind of relationships for instruction collaborations between different institutions happen between the college and university environment? Kind of looking to Florida, and we'll take a look in a moment to see how we can kind of narrow that down. Because if we talk about collaborations between librarians doing information literacy instruction from a college to a university, you don't necessarily know every institution that your students are transferring from, but there are different pathways that we might be able to utilize to form relationships, so we can see, if I'm working at a college, what can I do to make sure that I'm preparing the students for what is more known on my end for when they go to university, and what can we on the university side do to make sure that we're meeting the needs where the students are with the background that they have coming in. So that's really one of the main things. So why would we really want direct institution information literacy instruction collaborations? Partly to help reduce that gap in information literacy instruction, to make sure they're sort of meeting more in the middle. A lot of times those institutions are connected by transfer agreements. They're connected geographically. We might be part of the same regional or state or national organizations, which might give us a familiarity with each other already. But it can also help with sharing ideas, strategies, and capacity. Working at Pasco-Hernando State College, there were 2 librarians for each of the 5 campuses. Here at USF, we have many librarians. We of course have many more students and many more programs, but we have individuals who are able to specialize more in instructional design and learning styles, teaching styles, and technology, and information literacy. So we have more people to be able to draw experience from. So if we're able to connect that with other institutions from whom we're receiving students, maybe some of those ideas, maybe that's some of those strategies, maybe aspect of that technology, maybe some of that structuring or framing might be something that we can share back and forth. And of course, that's just an example of scale. That doesn't mean that somebody who's working at a college is not going to have some amazing idea that a university is going to benefit from. But just when we're looking at what people have a capacity for, might be a greater chance of being able to introduce something either into curriculum or library instruction that maybe just in-house we might not have had the capacity to do. We also know that, like I said, these students are doing these kind of transfer environments already. So if we have an idea of where most of our students are coming from, understanding the environment, the transfer environment can help us kind of understand how we might be able to serve it better. So that kind of requires sort of libraries or institutions on both ends of that tunnel. And especially, there are also other areas that I know that I've come across, and Janet and I have talked about between PHSC and USF. When I worked at another campus at the college, there were advisors from other universities who used to physically be stationed at the college, who would work with students and kind of get them up and going so they were ready to get in. There's scholarships, veteran services that work heavily with transfer students. And we know, of course, as is evident from here and much of what we do, librarianship is a very collaborative endeavor anyway. So the idea that these kind of institutional collaborations occur in other areas at college and university environments that work to advance our students, our patrons, libraries have a possibility of engaging with each other in a similar way, or at least that's the general idea. And I was kind of surprised when I came and entered into the university environment that this wasn't necessarily a common thing, and it wasn't even necessarily something I thought of, when I was at the college to reach out to. So that kind of leads us to kind of a first of two questions that we have, and I know this is going to be sort of dropping things into the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A afterwards, but just as kind of like a little poll, what are the nature of some of the transfer agreements in your area, in your state or region? I know, like here in Florida, we have 28 public colleges and 12 public universities. So we have a large number of institutions where there are different types of transfer agreements. I was talking with colleagues in other states where their colleges don't have any bachelor's degrees, and things like that will affect transfer environments and articulation agreements. So just curious if anybody could just share a couple words or something like that in the chat, maybe about in seeing how how students might be transferring between different organizations. Is there anything kind of specific to your area? Is it mainly more does it tend to be people who are transferring to a university because they want to go on to a master's program? Does it tend to be a particular demographic or from a particular region, or is it something that's more based on legislation?
And I will lean on you, Andrew, for the chat, because I'm afraid if I try to pull up the chat, I'll remove the screen share.
As yet, I don't think I see anybody dropping anything in, and that's okay. If we want to go ahead and leave it, and we're getting towards the end of the day. If you've already been answering questions and asking questions, I get it too.
It also might be helpful to marinate a little bit and let
exactly.
things.
That's what we're doing.
Maybe we could put the question in the chat too, so I can move to the next slide. That might be helpful.
Yeah, sure. If we want to do that. See if I can do that. Okay. I'm sure if we want to go on to the next one.
Excellent.
So just to, I touched on this a little bit, but just to kind of give some background for what our transfer environment looks like. One of the things that's really important from a historical standpoint that doesn't get a lot of recognition a lot of times is the nature of where some of our junior community state colleges came from. And we had a very powerful HBCU presence with 12 African-American pre-integration community colleges, which became really a backbone for a lot of our state college system that we have now. And there's a great book on it, The Magnificent 12, which has a lot of great voice and representation in it that I always like to give give kudos and credence to. Also, too, we have a colleague that works here at USF as a faculty member who does research looking at librarians and transfer student success, who talks about these different types of transfer. If we're looking at dual enrollment with high school students, if we're talking about students who transfer from a university to a specific college because that college maybe has a specific track. Transient students who are moving around and constantly transferring into different organizations. My favorite one is a swirling transfer, where sometimes students will be enrolled in multiple institutions simultaneously. So even when we talk about how do we have relationships across institutions for transfer students, understanding that transfer environment is really critical to that. Like I said, a lot of our colleges offer bachelor's degrees, and that changes the nature of how librarians would structure instruction and planning for their students. And traditionally, we're used to that kind of 2+2 system that tends to be the sort of 2 years at a college, 2 years at a university. If you graduate from a college, public college in Florida, you are guaranteed a spot at one of the 12 public universities. It may not be the university of your first choice, but you're guaranteed a spot at one. University of Central Florida has a deep articulation agreement where they actually have librarians stationed in several colleges with which they have transfer agreements. And they're kind of like the shining North Star example of that deep integration and collaboration between colleges and university libraries. USF has a similar program called FUSE, which is an articulation agreement that not only says if you go to these 8 colleges in these 8 tracks, not only will you get into USF specifically, but you will also get into a specific program. At UCF, you might arrive at the university, but you still have to apply for the program. And this is just kind of gives a little bit of scale for the institutions that we're talking about. The left image is the number of the location of the universities, and then the colleges are on the right. And the FUSE institutions that USF has a relationship with for its articulation agreement are the 8 that are listed there in the middle. And that's really where Jana and I are starting to look at our research of, do these relationships exist? Do these partnerships exist between librarians? If so, how are they represented? How effective are they? How are they represented in literature, in research literature? So that was kind of how we began to narrow this idea of either studying or then forming, hopefully, relationships that are collaborations across institutions, kind of bigger, Florida, USF, FUSE.
Yeah, and so I think it might be helpful to take a step back and just like take inventory of like, okay, what are the types of information literacy instruction that's currently in place for transfer students? And so we're just kind of comparing a little bit to PHSC and USF. So I'm at PHSC, and I think a lot of folks are familiar with kind of the general library orientation, the one shot, if you will. At a community college, it would probably be more focused on kind of basic library overview, which I know there's a lot of discussion about the value of that one shot. Currently, we're pretty happy to take any opportunities we can get to just engage with the students directly, especially post-COVID. And so at our institution, what we're focusing on is just showing them again where the library is, who their librarian is, reminding them that we're people, we're not, we're friendly, we want to help them. Because I think this came up in one of the earlier sessions, is that we can't assume that students, when they get to college, know what the library is or how it works. I know many of us have lamented the decline of K through 12 school librarians. That's been the case in Florida too. We've, many institutions, they might be lucky to have a media center specialist, and that person's usually stretched pretty thin. So kind of just some basic library orientation for when they get in. And a lot of our instruction isn't necessarily tailored directly at transfer students. It's kind of a general net. So we might have LibGuides for specific classes. We focus pretty heavily on MLA and APA instruction, kind of basic research skills and citations. But one of the advantages at the community college level is because it's a smaller student body, because we're more local to where students are at, we have the opportunity to do those one-on-one consultations that are available at the university library. But maybe it's in a much bigger setting. You might have to make an appointment. Here you can kind of just drop in anytime, and I'm here. And so that's a level of access that you might not be able to get. And again, I kind of hinted at this already, but some of the skills that we're focusing in on at the community colleges is we're looking more at our incoming students maybe than our outgoing students, partly because there's such an emphasis on trying to get students that are they're taking college classes, and we're very happy that they are, but they're not necessarily maybe traditionally they wouldn't be considered ready for college. So college readiness is a big issue that we work with, like our tutoring center and faculty to try to address those needs. Because I'm not sure how it is in a lot of other states. I know there's various approaches to this, but like when you do placement testing here, you might be strongly recommended to take like a developmental writing or reading class, but you don't have to. And there's a discussion about how effective those are anyway, but they, it kind of has turned, you know, maybe the composition one class sometimes into a sink or swim situation. So that's kind of a big focus, but, you know, again, since the Florida State College system, and again, for us, of our 28 state colleges, and you know, I think they're almost all state colleges, not community colleges. There's a couple that are specifically community colleges, but what that means in practicality is that we're functionally community colleges, but we might offer a couple bachelor's programs. And so one of the things that we do is we maybe target those bachelor programs with specific instruction. So for instance, we have a business administration program. So we would kind of go in there and hit them more heavily with APA and some of the writing expectations. But we also have certain programs that, like our nursing program and some of our like surgical tech programs and healthcare programs are very important at the 2-year level. So we'd spend a lot more of our targeted instruction for them because we know that they're going to eventually transfer to another institution. I know other institutions or other campuses have traditionally done outreach for dual enrollment students. So not necessarily what we're focusing on here, but again, kind of going physically to those partner institutions at the K through 12 level, and to try to get them comfortable with using the library before they, you know, even come to our college. But I guess that one of the major interventions that we would have here, that again, it isn't necessarily focused specifically on transfer students, but just about everybody will be subject to it, is our information literacy module, which is a Canvas course, or I shouldn't say, it's a segment of a Canvas course that is embedded in Composition 1 classes. And that's been kind of a relatively recent rollout in the last 2 years. I think there were some test classes and then they rolled it out for everybody. And so it's asynchronous, but basically what it does is it's instruction that's mapped onto the ACRL framework. And so at the very least, if you're taking Comp 1, you're going to get kind of exposed to some of the basic research concepts directly related to the information or the ACRL framework. And so I think the idea is that since we're looking at where can we get the greatest amount of instruction for our efforts, and that's kind of where it happens. And since those folks, anybody that transfers to another institution is likely to take Comp 1 with us, that's where they're getting exposed to it. But at USF, Andrew can speak more directly to what their interventions are.
So then this is where I get to be very fortunate because, you know, working with Janet and having been at the HSC, I'm familiar with those aspects that Janet's talking about, which otherwise I would not know if I was working with students who were coming in who I knew were transferring. We do have orientations and tutorials for folks that are coming in that are transfer students. We actually have like a student success librarian at USF who does a lot of work with transfer students too, with a lot of like outreach events and orientations and things like that, just right out of the gate and off the bat. But what's interesting is they're actually based at our St. Petersburg campus. There's Tampa and St. Petersburg on each side of Tampa Bay. The campuses for USF used to be separately accredited for some time. So now they've been centrally accredited again. So that role about how that affects interacting with transfer students on sort of a receiving end of new patrons, of new students for a specific transfer librarian is been a different and evolving conversation. We also have a lot of interdisciplinary courses, which often a lot of transfer students will take. We have courses offered through Veteran Services. We have a whole series of workshops for researchers, especially for our upper level, undergraduates and going into grad school. We do a lot of instructional sessions in the classroom, synchronously, remotely like this, lots of one-on-one consultations. And we also work with fellow faculty professors in looking at curriculum and assessment and collections to see how information literacy is kind of put into courses and things like that. So we get to be in a very collaborative environment. So information literacy instruction here kind of pervades everything that, especially in research instruction, our area, we really look at no matter how we interact with faculty and students. But the aspect that really aligns closely with what Janet was talking about is we do have a series of asynchronous information and data literacy workshops that have a badging system on it too. And I think we have a couple of screenshots of what those look like.
Yeah, do you want me to move on to the?
Oh, yes, please, please.
So like this is just a quick screenshot, and actually a lot of our slides, they do have links. I don't know if we can put a link. I don't know if we can put the PowerPoint directly in the chat, but basically like this is our information literacy module is largely built out in a LibGuide, but it's linked in Canvas, and there's quizzing elements within the Canvas environment. And then on Andrew's side, we've got a screenshot of those workshops.
We can see these are the way they've been structured are a bit different because, of course, the PHSC one is divided up specifically with aspects of frames within the framework. The ones at USF that are specifically asynchronous have to deal more with a particular topic, and then within them they have an integrated information literacy instruction component. So everything from different citation management programs and opposing viewpoints and primary sources, avoiding plagiarism, a lot of sort of introductory, I'll say introductory, and it's kind of regardless of, not connected to whether or not they're even undergrads or doctoral students, anywhere in between. And our faculty like them too, they learn a lot from it as well. But they also issue a badge at the end. So if you are doing a program that has a portfolio, you have an artifact that you can put in your portfolio as well. So we can see that sort of that's, if you were to look purely at what's asynchronous that students would navigate through with PHSC and with USF, how they're structured differently. They just kind of evolved somewhat independently of each other. And luckily, I think they do very well. But I think it would be even better if we have, if we are looking to update or plan what these might look like going forward with new iterations or new styles and new technology. Being able to collaborate with the folks at the other institutions can make it, even more seamless.
And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. So we're our research is we're sort of looking initially we're working on the literature review. We've kind of conducted the basic literature review, and we're looking for these evidence of direct collaboration between institutions, like what we're doing right now. Because again, we know that there's instruction happening for transfer students on either side, but what's happening across the aisle. And so far, we're not finding a ton. So we're finding a lot of, there is a lot more literature about transfer students, at least in regards to LIS literature, than there used to be. I kind of get the idea that prior to maybe 2012 or so, it was kind of like a fringe issue. People didn't really realize how many transfer students there are. So it's definitely become more of a, it's becoming more prevalent in the library science literature, but most of the interventions we're seeing are kind of on one side, and typically it's on the university side. So it's maybe looking at different initiatives that, like maybe a seminar for incoming transfer students when they would go to USF, or maybe an overview of like a special type of workshop that's targeted at transfer students, but and we're seeing a little bit on the community college side, but generally not a tremendous amount between. And so we're wondering, like, well, maybe it's not happening. And we're looking in our own environment because we're there, we're more familiar with it. But we're kind of suspect that what's happening is that it's just not like there is collaboration, but it's maybe more informal, or it's just not being written about, and it's not being recorded. And so that's what we're starting to take on. And Andrew will talk a little bit more about our search for a literature review.
This is just a little bit of background, just to kind of, when we're talking about literature review, we Janet and I are going to be presenting at ALA a poster kind of on a similar topic that we're talking about here. I got to present on a similar topic about that at the European Conference on Information Literacy in Poland last year. So getting to interact with these different colleagues in these different areas and talk about this at different national, international, state level, things like that. Very meaningful on our end. So this is just some of the, just when we talk about doing a literature review, I bring all these other things up because we've done a lot of the literature review. Next step probably is going to be, especially once ALA is done, is actually writing it up and working to get it published to start adding to some of the corpus for the literature on the topic. But these were just some of the methodologies and tools and filters that we were using when we were performing the literature review. The next slide just has the list of databases that we were referencing through and searching through in the process, which we'll go ahead and write up and hopefully have out published later this year, to just kind of get that going, so that we can continue the research, and then eventually I think we have some information about that too coming up about some of the research interviews that we'd like to do going forward.
So again, we want to, since we're not finding a lot of evidence of direct collaboration in the literature, we like to add to that literature, but we are finding some things. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot, and there was one of the fantastic panels earlier, talking about librarian and faculty collaboration. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff, and some of that's happening across institutions. And so that was maybe a little bit unexpected. But we're seeing a lot of discussion about maybe some of the things that's less exciting, but is really kind of the driving force of it, is we have various accrediting bodies that are basically starting to standardize what is information literacy instruction, like identifying what are the specific skills that we're looking for. And we see that a little bit through ALA, but like through actual accrediting bodies, that's becoming more important. And also state mandates are really driving a lot of this. And we've talked a little bit about that earlier with, again, there's a greater appetite from the public to demonstrate higher value for higher education. Or let me take that back. Like making sure that the money spent on higher education is targeted well. And so one of the things that, again, the community college has been seized as a great opportunity for that. And I know that in Florida, higher ed is a very kind of a difficult political issue, but community colleges have been so we're popular with everybody, so we're in a good spot. But the state mandates are really kind of driving that. So when the legislature says, well, we need you, USF, to be able to accept credits from your regional community colleges, and so let's make that happen. And so basically everybody's got to make that happen somehow. So that's really, and we've seen that across the country. But we also see collaboration directly between librarians through other means. So means like this. So we have maybe a professional development conference, but also within the state of Florida, we have a whole web of various consortia and organizations, and I'm sure you have that too in Tennessee and other regions. I know this conference is well represented around the country. But for instance, in Florida, all of 40 of our state universities and colleges are linked together by a common what am I thinking of the word? Catalog. And a lot of that kind of the tech support that goes behind it. We have the group licensing that's negotiated on behalf of the entire state. And our ILS is all part of the state. So it's, but that creates like a network of we're all using the same like library infrastructure behind the scenes. So there's opportunities to kind of collaborate that way. And that's, again, maybe a little bit behind the scenes. But when you're talking about finding, like how do students do research? How do they find articles? It's a very similar experience, whether they're coming from PHSC or Hillsborough Community College or USF. It's a similar catalog interface. And then, of course, there's our regional multi-type library cooperative, TBLC, hosts like conferences, but also lots of different opportunities for librarians to get together. And of course, ALA, FLA, and all of that. So there is like a really rich network, but it's just, again, maybe not directly between those partner institution libraries. And so that led us to ask, and again, you can put this in the chat, and but what kind of library collaborations are you seeing? Because again, we suspect there's a lot more out there, and kind of the next phases of our research is to start interviewing folks and seeing what they're doing. But if you'd be happy to share, what are some of the things that you've seen in your environment? And oh, go ahead, Andrew.
And to say thank you to Logan for sharing from the previous question about what is the nature of transfer agreements in your area. Logan replies, if I recall correctly, it really depends on the institution. As a transfer student myself, the 2-year institution I attended had a close relationship with the local university. So there were bridge programs, a clear credit hour transfer, et cetera. And that's a really key aspect too. I know with students moving between different colleges in Florida, if you're in a college that has a particular track with University of Central Florida, and then it turns out, well, actually, I really want to go on this specific pathway, this program, with something that's going to be at USF, then we see transfers between one college to another college to then transfer to USF based on a program. And that list of those 8 institutions that we had a relationship with USF infused, they're not all the same program. So one institution might have, the cybersecurity track, and then another one might have a nursing track, or anything in between. So as a result, like focusing on that area, that also makes looking at how our librarians work directly between institutions it's always more dynamic, because there's also the transfer going on between that. Logan adds in on this question too, for what kind of collaborations are you seeing. Logan says, our state library consortium, Pascal, P-A-S-C-A-L, Pascal, is an actual lifesaver. I worked at an institution where I was the only librarian, with massive support from a paraprofessional, and having that community and collective support really ensured we still function, for lack of a better word. And now Pascal is working really diligently for our OER and OER publication. So that's great. So that's an interesting collaboration.
That's something that our actually tomorrow and Friday there's a it's called Florida Virtual Campus, but that organization that kind of manages a lot of the infrastructure for the 40 colleges and universities has an OER summit. So they really they make it happen.
Yeah, and in Florida too, I mean, there's state library work, but even the regional consortiums too, like the Tampa Bay Library Consortium, they handle all of the interlibrary loan transportation. They have the contract for that and manage that for the state. And they also handle managing the Ask a Librarian live chat reference service. And different consortia will offer different services and things like that for librarians and library systems. But those working closely with things like TBLC, Tampa Bay Library Consortium, that's a great institution to consortium example. Thank you, Logan.
Well, I'll move on to the next slide, but keep putting your collaborations in the chat, and then maybe at the end we can discuss any more that come up. So some examples, again, or the kind of the big picture stuff we're seeing is at the state mandates and consortium level things, but we are seeing some collaborations. And one of the big things that one of the institutions that keeps coming up, and not just because we're in Florida, but just keeps coming up in the transfer discussion, is some of the stuff they're doing over at UCF. And I know University of Central Florida, they're in Orlando, traditionally a rival of USF where Andrew works, but I'm an unaffiliated party of both, so I love all of them. But so UCF has taken on kind of a really aggressive outreach for their transfer community, because and so they have various initiatives. So for instance, I think Andrew, you've already mentioned that UCF would embed they have actual UCF librarians, but they're working at their partner colleges. So I think there's 6 partner colleges. So, and I think part of that is because they actually have like a small version of their, like a sort of like a building, like a camp, like a mini campus actually. But it's physically situated on each of their partner institutions, and they have a librarian that works there. So there you're having like a direct relationship with the university librarian before you even leave to go to the university. And I put links to some of the articles that mention this. And this isn't an exhaustive list of, but these are just some of the articles that mention these. Another thing that UCF, and we've seen this a little bit with some other institutions, but again, they've kind of taken as an institution, kind of a big overhaul. I think in the mid 2000s, they got together with all their partner institutions and all of their departments on campus, including the libraries, and kind of focused on how can we best meet the needs of these transfer students and make that transfer as seamless as possible. And part of that is instituting transfers, like a specific role for having a transfer student librarian, like what Andrew mentioned, that is in place at UCF. So we are seeing that a little bit more. And actually at UNC Wilmington, I found another article that mentioned that that was an initiative that they had. They had an opening, and they recognized a greater need to directly reach these transfer students as they're coming in. So making a dedicated librarian position just for transfer students. Some other things too, like in Ohio, this is a little bit older article, so I'm curious to see like what this is still playing out. But this was one of the earlier ones that tended to really place the call for, like, we need to get, we have these mandates at the state level, and we can really leverage our consortium or our consortial partners to make this happen, because they're working, again, if you have all of these institutions operating in a similar bibliographic environment, you have the opportunity to make that instruction transfer. Like, again, if you have a similar research process, at least when you're starting your research, why not build on that? And using those kind of statewide partnerships to make that happen. Let's see, I mentioned the transfer student librarians. And again, we've talked about this a little bit, but again, this article kind of mentioned that just more and more states are mandating information literacy standards as part of their articulation agreements. And I've looked over some of those in Florida, and I haven't actually seen anything specific that talks about like information literacy standards as such, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's in there, and we just haven't found it yet. But many states have done that. Another model of collaboration that we're seeing a little bit is maybe the one-day workshop. So Appalachian State University, this article discussed that. They have sort of a get-together of all their feeder schools, a one-day, essentially a conference or symposium or workshop, whatever you want to call it, similar to what we're doing today. And they can get together and present and talk and share ideas and really kind of build those relationships within that environment. And this is, again, I keep coming back to what UCF is doing, because they seem to be kind of ahead of the game on this. But they had a similar event, and that's what the screenshot is. Their webpage is still up for that, and so you can kind of see what they've been up to. And so I guess the next question is, what are we up to next? So I'll let Andrew he's kind of touched a little bit about that.
Yeah, so really as the last couple of slides here in the last few minutes, I mentioned kind of from a research standpoint, we're looking at a research and a practitioner standpoint. So from a research standpoint, I mentioned too, really, these are conversations we want to engage in directly with fellow colleagues and fellow practitioners. Like, what is happening in your environments? These environments are dynamic, they're vast, they're expansive. How do we find out what's going on? How do we share this kind of information on these particular types of collaborations? Are they going on? Can we get them started? So again, we're going to be talking about this at ALA. So if anybody from here is going to be at ALA, we're looking forward to seeing you there. Of course, like I said, we talked about literature review to kind of highlight the fact that if these relationships are out there and we've got this awesome work going on, again, often a matter of capacity, there really isn't anything heavily represented in the literature. What Janet and I are looking at doing is defining this, seeking this out more formally. So the next stage for our research is going to be conducting some interview research with librarians and academic advisors that are associated with the FUSE programs at USF and the 8 partner colleges. So the idea is to talk to librarians at USF and the other colleges, and then also academic advisors who work specifically with FUSE. So to understand both, do these relationships happen? Do these collaborations happen? Institution to institution. Are they building together? Are they not? If not, what can we do to maybe try to change that? And then also, especially with the academic advisors, so that we as librarians understand the transfer environment. If we talk about trying to build relationships in this space, we should really know as much as we can about that space. So that's what we're going to do. So we've already done some test interviews, and we're going to finalize after ALA, I think, our questions, start running the questions, the methodology through IRB, and then move forward from there. So that's the research aspect. And then as a practitioner, we've decided to go ahead and put the money, put the money where the mouth is, and say we too are going to have a day where we're going to have librarians from these different institutions come together. So Pasco-Hernando State College has a library day, a library staff day where they close the libraries and everybody comes together every year. So some of us at USF are fortunate to be able to come, and we're going to attend, and we're going to spend the day together, and we're going to talk stuff out. So kind of like a smaller, maybe more informal version of what was going on with UCF and Appalachian State. But moving this from the sort of conceptual into the practical to see what we can do in a more concrete manner, given that we have these articulation agreements and we have these relationships, and so we're gonna start making some of the practical happen. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming in. And I know it's a late session of the day. But we've been asking some questions throughout the day, so we'll I don't know how, maybe a few minutes. If there's any more questions that have popped into the chat, or if anybody is able to pipe up and ask them and share your thoughts.
There was one more observation. Logan says, unrelated, but UCF's institutional repository is, and then it's a smiley face with big heart eyes coming out of it.
Oh, that's fantastic.